All right. We are going to get ready to begin here. Just one more housekeeping request. We really want to take advantage of these seats. If there are empty seats next to you, will you raise your hand? So the folks in the back, if you do want to sit down, please take advantage of the seats there and be comfortable to enjoy this afternoon. All right. So keep those hands up if folks are coming, but otherwise we want to kick it off right here. So, hello LMU, my name is Patrick Furlong, and on behalf of the committee of staff, faculty, and students that work to make this day possible, we really want to thank you for joining us. We have a great afternoon in store, so we're going to dive right in. I'm pleased to present Timothy Law Snyder, the president of Loyola Marymount University. President Snyder has been a dedicated professor and administrator at Jesuit universities for 30 years. He earned his MA and PhD in applied and computational mathematics from Princeton University. He also has his MS in mathematics, a BA in psychology, and a BS in mathematics from the University of Toledo. Please join me in welcoming the 16th president of Loyola Marymount University, President and Professor Timothy Law Snyder.
Thank you, Mr. Furlong. Good afternoon, Lions. How you feeling? Go Lions! G-Dog has not uttered that in about 10 years. Let's hear it again. Go Lions! Thank you for joining us. This is obviously a much anticipated event. I'm glad to see it standing room only. There still exist spare seats where you have a seat next to you. Again, raise your arms. Those in the back, take the time to come forward and occupy those seats. It's okay. There's enough for everybody. You don't have to worry about that first shall be last and last shall be first thing in this event. We are honored to spend our afternoon with such an exceptional man and his two homies, Michael and Edwin. Gentlemen, could you stand up? Welcome to LMU. Thank you, Father Greg, for sharing your heart with us this afternoon and for continuing to be an inspiration across cultures, languages, neighborhoods, and nations. We owe a debt of gratitude to all those involved in making this happen today. So we thank Professor and Chair of Theological Studies, Doug Christie. Could you rise, please, for a moment? Patrick Furlong, you just saw, but Patrick, you can rise again. I don't know where you went. There you are. You've already risen. Not bad. And Patrick, by the way, is a case manager for LMU's Community of Care. We also have with us Dean Robin Crabtree of the Bellarmine College of Liberal Arts, who helped put this together as well. We have Senior Vice President for Student Affairs, Dr. Lainey Bove. And I should mention as well, we have our Provost, Dr. Thomas Poon. Our VP for Mission and Ministry, John Sebastian. Trustee, Reverend Alan Deck, Society of Jesus. Trustee, Queen of Westchester Peace and Kindness, Karen Dial. Trustee, Belkin Genius and Dog Whisperer, Jan Pipkin. And I probably left about 300 people out, so I apologize to those whom I have not yet seen. Our central purposes at LMU, our central purpose is that we share St. Ignatius's commitment to finding God in all things. It's a phrase we use often, it's a phrase we hear often. And when we talk about the encouragement of learning, when we talk about the education of the whole person, when we talk about the service of faith and the promotion of justice, these features stem from our foundational belief that God, the transcendent, is waiting everywhere to be discovered, to be cherished, reverenced, and served. God is to be found in every branch of the tree of knowledge. And just as much in every twig of the trees, in our backyards, and also the trees of our veins, our muscles, the lymphatic systems that tend to keep, as I like to say, the xylem flowing. That's for the plant lovers in the room. The basic idea is God is to be found in everything and in every person, every one of us, as persons born, as Catholic social teaching tells us, of immutable dignity. I know of no one who has been more of a pioneer in helping us understand finding God in all things than Father Greg Boyle. With wisdom and courage, we here would say the courage of a lion, Father Boyle has sought relentlessly to discover, and just as importantly, to disclose to the rest of us in his magnificent writings how God can be found precisely in places we never dreamed of looking. This is his latest, Barking to the Choir. I haven't read it yet, but it'll be just like Tattoos of the Heart. The pages will be stained with tears. And it's strange, I don't know if it's an even-odd thing, but they alternate between laughter and crying out of despair as you live through and with Father Greg, at least in the tattoos. So I'm looking forward to reading this. Is there anybody who's been on the New York Times bestseller list here at the university? Father Greg has been on that. And to see a book that is religious reach that level says a lot about how he has brought what we would call a signature LMU experience to the masses. He shows us vividly why we must be with the margins of society, to dwell with the poor, the vulnerable, and the discarded, not so we can achieve something on their behalf, and not because they need anything, but because that is where God is to be found. Father Greg does all of this with kindness, with authenticity, and I don't know how many copies of him exist, but he seems to be in multiple places at one time. You know, for example, you might read on a given Sunday that he gave 3 commencement addresses. That's happened before. He models what it means to accompany all those with whom he comes in touch. And he tells so beautifully their stories and his story that for a moment it allows us to tag along. And only later on, as is the case with the stranger on the road to Emmaus, we realize through his artistry just whom we have really been allowed to journey alongside. And so I invite each of us today to listen to Father Boyle. I sat next to him at a commencement. His phone was lighting up. It was like 4th of July, and I said, "This isn't 4th of July, is it?" And G-Dog this and G-Dog that, and all the homies are riddling and rumbling and rampling, and it was just crazy. He said, "Oh, it's my birthday." So I ask that you listen to Father Greg, or I think I can safely call him G-Dog, this afternoon, and through our listening to wait quiet and still for what God has to say to each of us about how we can go deeper into our mission to help form, to help be women and men for and with others, and thus also women and men who are for and with God. Through Father Boyle, we can do that. So welcome from the heart, welcome from the mind, and welcome with plenty of soul. Enjoy the day.
Thank you, President Snyder. So as the LMU community prepared for this day, many students, staff, and faculty members have read and engaged in a lively conversation about the importance and the meaning of Father Greg's new book, Barking to the Choir. And so as we prepare to hear from Father Greg and his 2 homies, we also felt it important to lift up voices in our community to reflect on the resonance of the work of Father Greg and Homeboy Industries and how it impacts us here at LMU. And so it's my pleasure to introduce the first of these two amazing students to share her reflection on barking to the choir. Melissa Savio is a senator for ASLMU, a member of Bell's service organization, and a theology major. Give it up for the theology majors. In the summer of 2016, Melissa had the chance to intern at Homeboy Industries. So please welcome Melissa Savio.
Good afternoon, everyone. When reflecting on the ways barking to the choir has intertwined with my experience at LMU, there are so many beautiful examples that come to mind. Just like this book, so much of my time at LMU has been rooted in kinship and compassion. When talking about the ways in which we should respond to things like trauma, Father Greg writes this: kinship asks us to move from blame to understanding. Our practice of awe empties a room, and suddenly there is space for expansive compassion. A large part of my time at LMU has been marked by my participation in the Bell Service Org. This org is one that is committed to advocating for domestic violence awareness. In order to be strong advocates, our members work hard to educate themselves on the cycle of violence and how that is perpetuated in relationships. Breaking the cycle of violence is something that has to be done tenderly. Last spring, our organization decided to have our spring retreat at Homeboy Industries. In barking to the choir, Father Greg describes how powerful this place is many times. It was here that we heard the testimonies from different homies and what breaking the cycle meant to them. This ranged from breaking generational cycles of gang participation, to breaking the cycle of addictions, to breaking the cycle of domestic violence. Going to Homeboy Industry not only taught us the importance of advocacy through supporting nonprofits, but also how to listen from a place of compassion rather than condemnation. However, it is important to note that the idea of breaking the cycle is not something that is only an issue at Homeboy Industries, but also here on campus. During Domestic Violence Awareness Month, the Bell Service Org puts on their 24-hour silent protest. It was in tabling this event that multiple students came up to share their story. My mom, my sister, my brother, me, all sharing ways in which domestic violence had affected their lives. It's moments like these where we are reminded how we are called to respond. Father Greg talks about how he doesn't aim to fix the people who walk into Homeboy, but rather to accompany them on realizing their own God-given value. I think it's moments like these when our peers share their hardships and their wounds. We respond with compassion and kinship in all of what they have to carry. My all-time favorite quote from Father Greg states, "Resilience is born by grounding yourself in your own loveliness, hitting notes you thought were way out of your range." The cycle of violence can at times seem overwhelming, but it's in reminding people of their own loveliness that we are able to accompany others with a love rooted in the gospel. Now to introduce Father Greg and the homies is James Pratt. James is an RA and member of Modus Service Org and a senior biochemistry major. He has also served as an LSBO mentor in Lennox for the last 2 years.
Hi, everybody. Being a senior in the first-year residence halls has its perks. For one, I live right next to Pizza Hut. And nothing brings people together like poor dining decisions. I've lived with freshmen for all 4 years of my college career, and people often ask, how do you do it? My residents regularly assume that as a senior, I have everything figured out. Spoiler alert, I never have. So really, at the end of the day, being an RA for freshmen is a great ego boost. I've definitely let it go to my head. My first year on the job was the hardest. Training helped us prepare for any possible situation. I remember sitting through most of those sessions thinking, I probably won't have to deal with any of those. I hit what I call the big five at the end of my first semester. Suicidal ideation, sexual assault, medical transports, emergency room visits, and coming out. I asked my boss, why do these things keep happening when I'm on duty? Why is it always happening to me? Father Greg Boyle writes in Barking to the Choir, our narcissistic, ego-clinging mindset, we can't see, I'm so sorry, I misquoted. And our narcissistic, ego-clinging mindset, we can't see the whole play because we're too absorbed in our role in it. All of these moving parts were starting to crash into my previously egocentric view of my work. My boss told me that I had been prepared for this my entire life, and that we were supposed to be connected in these ways because we had been built up to this point together. The play was becoming more clear every time one of these big fives have happened and continue today. But these difficult journeys were consistently marked by the brightest smiles, the heartiest laughs, and the strongest connections that I've made at LMU. Those moments in which we truly see the face of God. In Barking to the Choir, again, Father Greg Boyle writes, paradise is not a place that awaits our arrival, but a present we arrive at. Father Greg Boyle of the Society of Jesus founded Homeboy Industries in 1988, which quickly became one of the largest gang rehabilitation program in the world. As said previously, he's a New York Times best-selling author of 2 books, Tattoos on the Heart and Barking to the Choir. He's an LMU alum with a master's degree in English and has been working with the Dolores Mission and surrounding communities of Los Angeles for over 20 years. Father Greg, your work has inspired everything that I do as an RA, and it's greatly influenced my LMU experience. But before we hear from you, and I'm sorry, I am actually more excited to hear from your homies. 2 men, Michael Henry and Edwin Ramos. 2 men whose stories I cannot wait to hear. It is my honor to introduce Michael Henry to the stage.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael Henry, which I was introduced. I'm an ex-gang member. I'm from South Central, Los Angeles, Watts, California. I started gang bang around when I was 13 or 14 years old. I gang banged for many, many years. I believe more than the students that's here, you know, if you're 20s, maybe 30, I gang bang. And been in prison mostly all my life. And it wasn't no fun thing. It was fun from the beginning, but during the middle, it wasn't. By me gang banging, I'm being shot, I'm being stabbed, I'm being jumped on, almost ran over, I lost homegirls right in front of me. I did a stupid choice in my life, you know, with other, you know, gang members. And turn around, I learned, you know, it took somebody to wake me up, which was my grandson. He 10 years old. When he was born, I was heavy on drugs, crack cocaine and PCP. When he was, my daughter came and talked to me a couple of days before she had him, and we talked. As I could stand up here, I'm very proud to say I've been clean off of drugs for 10 years. I thank God. I had disrespected myself and disrespected my family. And turn around, I came from a good family, but I asked myself every day, how did I get involved in gangs? How did I get involved in drugs? As right now, it still haven't been revealed to me. You know, it's a bad choice that I made. My thing now, I'm still, I'm at Homeboy. I thank the G-Dog for accepting me. I'm there, getting my GED, and I'm finna go learn the trade, being a mortician assistant. And I thank God, he opened my eyes for that. And the homies there, the homegirls there, we are family. We help one another. And some of them, some I ain't gonna say is out of the game, but they trying their best to get out. And we give each other strength. And I think, that I love going there every day. When I go there, I get a peace in my heart, my mind, my soul, my spirit. And when I leave, I go back to the neighborhood and I look, but I see people still using who I used to use with. And I be trying to talk to them. I go to NA and AA, and I speak at my NA and AA. And turn around, I'm trying to help the people who I came up with to try to get out of that, using, crack. Now that the thing met, drinking, and turn around, as they say, you could talk to 10, maybe one would listen. And I'm proud to say I'm one out of 10 that listen. I'm tired of being tired of going to prison. Because like I said, I was back and forth in prison. I was out my children's life, and now I'm bonding with my children, I'm bonding with my grandkids, and I'm very proud to be in their life and be in my grandchildren's life. I thank God for that, And I have my grandkids, they call me every morning and every evening when they get out of school and talk to me. And it made me feel good. Like we say, I got the S on my chest because I'm doing something positive in my life, and turn around by me doing that. They're looking up to me, and I see that I am a role model to them. If I go back to prison, turn around, everything gonna crumble. It's gonna crumble on me, it's gonna crumble on them. And I don't wanna hurt them, and I don't wanna hurt myself. So like I said, I'm at Homeboy trying to get my GED, give me a trade to better my life, and I love Homeboy, and turn around. If I were to hit the lottery, me personally, I'm gonna donate, part of my earnings to Homeboy to help others, and I encourage you, just talk to, come up to Homeboy and just talk to us, because we're gonna talk to you. We're gonna tell you the real. We ain't gonna lie to you. We're gonna tell you about when we was in gang, how we use drugs and stuff. Just come on up there, they have the tour, we got the cafe, we got the bakery, we got all this, just come up there, and if any questions you have when we get through with this, just come up and, talk to us, and we'll answer your question. Thank you for your time and service.
Well, like I tell everybody at Homeboys, welcome to Homeboys, man. I hope you, but I'm not a Homeboys here, But thank you, though. My name is Edwin Ramos. I started gang banging when I was like 13, 14, 15, It got kind of serious for me when I was like 16. I went to juvenile hall for stealing a car and try to run over a cop. I wasn't thinking, I didn't know no better. That was the first time I got drunk, I guess, but, well, after that, it's like, I used to look up to my twin brother, and my uncles, my cousins, and just family-wise, like, I thought they were Superman, Spider-Man, Iron Man to me, but I guess it wasn't. But I started realizing, like, my mom was my mom and my dad, but I never paid attention to her. One day, I realized she was always there, every time I'll get busted, every time I'll get in trouble. Like, she was always there, never failed to go visit me when I was in juvenile hall, camp, in the county, in prison, whatever. She was always there, and one day I realized that, but she was already dying on me. She had cancer. And I made it out for a month, and I didn't know how serious it was, like how much I hurt her, you know? And one day her doctor called me. She's like, hey, what's up? Where you at? I was like, I'm at the house. Why, what's up? She's like, hey, you need to come visit your mom. You need to come spend time with your mom. You need to realize what you have in life. I'm like, what do you mean? And she's off that, she got cancer. You never know, but I'm gonna let you know straight up. You probably be mad at me, but she got a few hours, minutes, seconds, and I'm like, what do you mean? Like, and I just feel like somebody's hit me in my chest, and like low key, I made it to the hospital, and right when I said I'm sorry and everything, she just let go of me and she died. And a week after, that's when I picked up 11 years with 2 strikes. But before that, before I forget, Pops was always there for me when I was 13 years old. He always used to tell me, do something with your life, grow up, I'm here for you. And he never failed, he was always there for me. And after the 11 years and everything, it's like, I took the 2 strikes, almost caught 30 years, and almost caught life. So I always did drugs and everything. After my mom died, I got lost. Even in prison, like, I was doing stupid shit. Sorry for my language, but when I got out, you know, I told Pops, I need help. He's like, what now, son? You know I'm here for you. And I just opened up. I cried. I talked to him. I feel like a little girl crying, but, you know, he heard me out. He was there for me. He gave me a hug. And thanks to him, I'm here now. I got busted. I've been out for 6 months. He's there for me now, and I've been clean for 6 months. I barely started my journey again. And after these 11 years, the only reason I changed my life because I got a little girl. When the first time I seen her, I cried. So that just tells me I'm a wrap. I'm done. So a lot of my family members got mad and everything, but now I'm doing AA, NA, parenting classes, and GED, working on my reading, my writing, and stuff like that, you know? So I'm just hoping someday I could be somebody special in my daughter's life. Like, she could come up to me like, Dad, I'm happy for you. But I tell you this much, when I was drowning and I had my back against the wall and everything, I swim now, but with my words, but to Pops, because G was always there for me. And if it wasn't for him, who knows where I would have been 6 feet under in prison, doing life. But thanks to him, you know what I mean, I'm here now, you know. And I like to say, hey, Pops, it's your turn now. But thank you, though.
Thank you all very much for your hospitality, and thank you for your kindness. Thank you, Michael and Edwin, for your goodness and for coming along. And the day won't ever come when I have more courage, or I am more noble, or I'm closer to God than the two of you. It's the privilege of my life for over 30 years, 34 years, to have walked with the homies and have found my heart altered and been able to move beyond the mind I have. And so it's such a gift and a privilege to know people like Joey, who is actually going to take my turn to go speak in Tulare. Tulare? How do you say that? Tulare? I have to cancel, so he's going to do it for me. And he's become quite a good speaker and much in demand. And we went out to dinner, and he was giving me tips on how to speak publicly. He said, you know, you got to pepper your talk with self-defecating humor. And I said, yeah, no shit. That's good advice. So brace yourselves. Here's why I think you're here this afternoon. It has very little to do with me. It has to do more with a longing, so we have this kind of deep and abiding desire within us, especially in the times in which we live, where we are sort of divided and tribal. And we want to stand against forgetting that we belong to each other. And so to that end, we want to imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle. And we want to dismantle the messages and the barriers that divide. And we want to inch our way out to the margins, whatever that means for us. We want to stand where Jesus stood, in the right place, at the edges, with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless. And we want to stand with those whose dignity has been denied and those whose burdens are more than they can bear. And we want to stand even with the easily despised and the readily left out, with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop, and with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. No kinship, no peace. No kinship, no justice. No kinship, no equality. You're here today, I think, because you want to create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. And so you inch your way to the edges, to the margins, and you brace yourselves because people will undoubtedly accuse you of wasting your time. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, "In this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing." And much like what Martin Luther King said about church could well be said about your time here at LMU. It's not the place you've come to, it's the place you go from. And other voices get heard because you went out to the margins. Well, none of that makes any damn sense at all, I don't think, unless we kind of align ourselves with the God who loves us without measure and without regret. The God who is too busy loving us to have any time left for anything else. My mom is dying. She's 92. And spending time with her yesterday and all these days, she's in and out of being coherent. And every once in a while, she'll do this thing. There are 8 of us, siblings, and a whole slew of grandkids. And we'll all be around her bed, and sometimes she doesn't even know you're there. And then all of a sudden, she'll do this. "You're here." And she'll focus on one person. And it's the notice of God's notice. The next day in prayer, I went, yeah, that's what it's about. How do you align yourself with the God who has only one goal in life, which is to look at you and say, "You're here." And suddenly, you're noticing the notice of God. And that's the only way it makes any damn sense to go to the margins, because you want to go there so you can notice God's notice. The homies are used to being watched, but they're not used to being seen. And that's kind of important. I had a spiritual director many years ago who said, we need a better God than the one we have. He was a Jesuit. But of course he's right, because we've settled for a partial God. There are 2 kinds of God, really. There's the God we actually have, and then there's the God we've settled for, the partial God, the more realistic God. I think, people had this experience when Dylan Roof walked into Mother Emanuel Church and killed all those people during the Bible study. And a week later, family members of the victim stood in front of him and said, "We forgive you." Everybody knew that you were in the presence of the God we actually have. But then 9 months later, when they sentenced him to death and said this was God's justice, you knew we had wandered back to the partial God. The more realistic God. We want to find the God, as Ignatius says, the God who's always greater, spacious, expansive, the God who knows that the answer to every question is compassion, the God who wants to understand and get underneath things, the God who does not share in the demonizing that we all engage in. The homies have taught me so much, and usually it comes by way of, mangling the English language. I always find it, kind of illuminating, like a homegirl named Lisa, who was part of our 18-month training program, wanted to introduce her man to me at the end of the day, so she walked him in and said, "This is my sufficient other." No doubt, yeah. We were talking earlier about, running businesses, and thank God Homeboy is a $19 million annual operation, and I don't really run it. I have a CEO, thank goodness, named Tom Vossel. So I don't have to worry about, cash flow and all those other things that I never worried about even before, but just ask my board. And so one day a homie came into my office and he said, "Damn, gee, my lady, she is in a bad mood today." And I said, "Why?" "Well, she's beginning her administration period." I said, "Well, I just finished mine, so kind of know what she's going through." But my favorite one happened at San Fernando Juvenile Hall, and I was presiding there, as I do once a month. And in those days, we were in a gym like this, and about 500 chairs, and all gang members and males. And I was sitting on a folding chair, and I was vested, my album, my stole, and I kind of closed my eyes as the homies got up to do the readings, and on my lap I had the little hoja that had the readings in English and Spanish, and I said, I'm just going to listen to the Word of God proclaimed, and so I closed my eyes, and a homie got up and did the first reading, and then another homie got up and did the psalm. And somewhere in the middle of the psalm, he was a little bit kind of overly confident. And he says, "The Lord is exhausted." And I said, "What the hell?" And it was, "The Lord is exalted." And I remember thinking at the time, wow, that's way better. That is a better God than the one we have. The exhausted God who's sort of extensive and other-centered and generous and spacious and oceanic and expansive. That is a better God than the one we have. And we won't ever achieve a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it unless we somehow inch our way out to the margins and align ourselves with the God who loves us without measure and without regret, and who only longs for us to notice the notice of God, who only longs to say to us, "You're here." So the homies have taught me about kinship and about anything that matters, and they've taught me how to text, and I'm so grateful to them because I find it sure beats the heck out of actually talking to people, and and I'm pretty good at it, LOL and OMG and BTW, and the homies have taught me a new one, OHN, which apparently stands for, "Oh, hell no." And I've been using that one quite a bit lately, and I know I can't be alone in being vexed by this autocorrect thing. I had a homegirl named Bertha. She was texting me on a Sunday. She's a tough cookie, and she says, "Where are you at?" And I said, "I'm about to speak to a room full of monjas." And monjas are nuns, sisters, religious women. "I'm about to speak to a room full of monjas." I pushed send, and autocorrect told her that I was about to speak to a room full of ninjas, which she thought was pretty darn interesting. The homies, even today, as I've been here, their hair is on fire, and oh my gosh, they're going to cut off my lights, and I have a car payment, and I'm this much amount short. And once a homie needed $100 to finish off his rent, and I didn't have it. So I wrote him back, I said, things are tight. And I pushed send, and Autocorrect told him, thongs are tight. And he said, sorry to hear that. You know, what about my rent, you know? So there I am in the car with two older homies, Manuel and Poncho, older vatos who do a variety of things at Homeboy in this number of years ago, and they're gonna help me go to Savio High School in Palm Desert. And so, you know that place? Yeah, you went there? Congratulations, I love that place. So Manuel was in the front seat, Poncho was in the back, and so it's like 2-hour drive, and so we're driving, and Manuel's 15 minutes, we're in on the road for about 15 minutes, and Manuel gets an incoming text, and he reads it to himself, and he chuckles, and I say, well, what is it? He goes, oh, it's from Snoopy back at the office. Well, I just seen Snoopy. Snoopy gave me a big abrazo as the day was beginning. Snoopy and Manuel work together in the clock-in room. They clock in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of our workers, all gang members. It is a tough job. I would not want it because occasionally gang members can be attitudinal. And so I said, well, what's he say? And he goes, oh, it's dumb. Let me find it. Oh, here it is. It's really stupid. Hey, dog, it's me, Snoops. Yeah, they got my ass locked up at county jail. They're charging me with being the ugliest vato in America. You have to come down right now, show them they got the wrong guy. Well, I nearly drove in oncoming traffic. We howled with laughter. And then I realized that Manuel and Snoopy are enemies. They're from rival gangs. They used to shoot bullets at each other. Now they shoot text messages. And there's a word for that, and the word is kinship. How do we obliterate once and for all the illusion that we are separate, that there is an us and a them? You know, you want to bridge the distance, even as LMU is the place you go from, even when you go in service, even when you're accompanying, even when you're with. You want to bridge the distance that can exist sometimes between service provider and service recipient. There's a distance in that, and you still want to bridge it. At Homeboy Industries, I'm not the great healer, and those gang members over there are in need of my exquisite healing. The truth be told, we're all a cry for help. We're all in need of healing. It's in fact one of the things that joins us together as members of the human family. One of the great privileges of my life was knowing Cesar Chavez as a friend, and he was just about the best listener I've ever been in the presence of. If you were talking to Cesar, nobody else existed. It was only you, laser beam focused. He was never looking over your shoulder to see if someone more important was on the approach. But once famously a reporter had commented to him and said, wow, these farm workers, they sure love you. And Cesar just shrugged and smiled and said, the feeling's mutual. And of course it is. That's the hope. How do we bridge the distance, even the daylight there that separates us? No one in our 30-year history at Homeboy found more job opportunities than this homie we all called Dreamer. I knew him as a little mocosito knucklehead growing up in Pico Gardens housing projects. He got into a gang at like 13. And one of the smartest kids I think I've ever known, super intelligent, though I can't recall he ever actually went to school. But he had a dangerous sense of humor that I always enjoyed. And older brothers got into a gang, and he's doing well now. He's in his 40s and married, kids, good construction job that we got him through Homeboy Industries. But in his early 20s, he was a yo-yo. He was in and out of being locked up, and he rarely got tired of being tired. He was just back and forth, back and forth. And I'd find him a job in the private sector with somebody or in one of our enterprises. But he'd always gravitate back to vague criminality, usually something involving drugs, you know, the sale of or the use of. and then he'd wander back to Homeboy. And so this was a pattern that was frustrating and repeated itself often. And so one day he'd finished a 4-month stretch of probation violation at the county jail, and there he is sitting in front of me. And he says what gang members, often say, "This time it'll be different." I said, all right. So with him sitting there, I call a friend of mine who runs a vending machine company in Alhambra, a guy named Gary. And Gary had hired homies in the past, so I'm hoping against hope maybe he'll do it again. And sure enough, he says, "You tell that guy he can start tomorrow." That's a holy man right there. So Dreamer began work the next day at the vending machine company. Well, 2 weeks later, there he is again in front of my desk, and I couldn't even believe it. I said, "Híjole, Madre Santa, here we go all over again." But this time he reaches into his pocket and he pulls out his very first paycheck. And he says, "Damn, gee, this paycheck makes me feel proper. I mean, my mom, she's proud of me, and my kids, they're not ashamed of me. And you know who I have to thank for this job." And I said, "Well, who?" And he looks at me strange and he says, "Well, God, of course." I said, "Oh, sure, no, that's right." That would be God. "You thought I was going to say you." I said, "No, gosh, God's number one." I said, "You are so lucky we're not living in them Genesis days." And I'm sorry, them Genesis days? He goes, "Yeah, because God would have had struck down your ass already by now, Well, I guess he told me, but the two of us, we just fell out of our chairs, howling with laughter, and I defy you to identify exactly who's the service provider and who's the service recipient. It's mutual. All of us are called to go from this place, to be enlightened witnesses, people who through your kindness and tenderness and focused, attentive love, return people to themselves. At Homeboy, we're kind of allergic to this notion of the hold the bar up and ask homies to measure up, because our exhausted God never does this. Why would we do it? Instead, we hold the mirror up and we tell people the truth, knowing that your truth is my truth is a gang member's truth. It's all the same truth. Here's the truth. You are exactly what God had in mind when God made you. And then you watch folks as they inhabit that truth, as they become that truth. And no bullet can pierce it. No 4 prison walls can keep it out. And death can't touch it because it's huge. But we all know at Homeboy that you have to reach in and you have to dismantle the messages of shame and disgrace that get in the way, that keep people from seeing that truth. Marcus Borg, the late, great scripture scholar, said that the principal suffering of the poor throughout history and throughout Scripture is shame and disgrace, and I think that's quite right. The Acts of the Apostles has this one odd line, and it says simply, "And awe came upon everyone." And it seems to suggest that the measure of health in any community at all, including this one, may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. So I get invited to give talks, and it happens, and I say yes a lot of times. And I was invited to go to Richmond, Virginia, and it was an all-day 9-to-5 gang-in service, and one of those hotel ballrooms. And I figured, well, maybe I'll give the keynote at the beginning, or I'll speak at lunch, or I'll close the day. And so I said yes. I bought my ticket. A week before I was to leave, I pulled out the letter that people invited me, and to my horror, I discovered that I was to be the only speaker all damn day at this 9-to-5 gang-in service. So I said to myself, oh, hell no. So right away I invited two homies in, Andre and Jose, and I sat them down, and they're trainees, like these two gentlemen, in their 18-month program. And I said, look, you're flying with me to Richmond, Virginia. I'd like you to speak and tell, in front of 600 social workers. I'd like you to get up and tell your stories. Take your time. Because we got a long-ass day to fill. Well, I'd never heard their stories, and Jose gets up, and he's 25 years old, and he was like in his 16th month of our 18-month program, and he had landed as a very valued member of our substance abuse team, a man solid in his own recovery and now helping younger homies. Been to prison, tattooed, and felon, and parolee. But he also had a long stretch of time as a homeless man, and an even longer stretch as a heroin addict. And so he gets up in front of 600 social workers, and he says, I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when my mom looked at me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers audibly gasp. And then he says, it sounds way worser in Spanish. And we got whiplash going from gasp to laugh. I guess I was 9, he continued, when my mom drove me to the deepest part of Baja California, and she walked me up to an orphanage. And she knocked on the door, and the guy came to the door, and she said, I found this kid, and she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me. And my grandmother came and rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school each day. First t-shirt because the blood would seep through, and the second t-shirt you could still see it. Finally, the 3rd t-shirt you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? Then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion, and he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everyone. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. For the truth of the matter is this: if we don't welcome our own wounds, we may well be tempted to despise the wounded. Let me end with this. It happens sometimes at universities that students will be forced to read my book against their will. I'm not suggesting this has ever happened here. and I'm not complaining. But this happened at Gonzaga University, my alma mater, sorry, because I know basketball gets very tender around here, and but I went here and I went there, so anyway, so I got invited to speak. It was a huge venue, like 1,000 people, and they had forced their incoming freshman class to read Tattoos on the Heart, and they asked me to come. I said, sure. And I hadn't been there in many years, and they said, could you bring 2 homies? And I do if they invite, if they're going to pay for it, you know. And I always pick homies kind of in the same way. I always pick enemies, rivals, who work together at Homeboy, just so that they have to share a hotel room together just to mess with them. And I always pick homies who have never flown before, just for the thrill, you know, of seeing gang members panicked in the sky. It was not long ago that I was at LAX with 2 older vatos, and one guy said, hey, are we flying Virgin Airlines because it's our first time? I said, yes, it's a requirement. We'll be coming home on American. So I picked 2 homies, Bobby, an African-American gang member who worked in the bakery at the time, and Mario, who worked at the time in our merchandise store. I've done this so many times, probably near 1,000 at this point, with men and women. I've never picked anybody quite like this guy, Mario, who was absolutely petrified of flying. I've never seen anything like it. In fact, he was terrified. He was hyperventilating, you know. And we hadn't even boarded the plane yet, you know. And so we're at Burbank Airport, which is a kind of a smaller venue, and big bay windows and Southwest Airlines, big planes. But they don't have that hermetically sealed chute that you walk through to get on the plane. You know, you have to walk out onto the tarmac like you're the president, and you walk up the steps of the front of the plane, and the big feature at Burbank is steps in the back of the plane. And so Bobby was off walking somewhere, and I'm sitting there with Mario, and I'm trying to calm him down. And our plane arrives, it's early morning, and I said, well, that's our plane. And he's sitting there, and I'm thinking he may die, you know, before we actually climb those stairs. And then I see the flight crew arrive, and they're 2 female flight attendants, and they're both holding very large cups of Starbucks coffee, and they're schlepping up the steps, you know, and Mario goes, when are we going to board the plane? And I said, as soon as they sober up the pilots. There they go now. Perhaps I shouldn't have said that, but I should tell you that probably in the history, our 30-year history, nobody has ever worked at Homeboy who has more tattoos than this guy Mario. He's all sleeved out. He's all neck blackened with the name of his gang, head shaved, covered in tattoos, forehead, cheeks, chin, eyelids that say the end, so that when he's in a coffin at the end of his life, it'll say the end. And I'd never been in public, and so when he and I were walking, I was trying to calm him down. We were walking in Burbank Airport, and people are like this, you know, and mothers are clutching their kids a little more closely, and which is fascinating, because if you were to go to Homeboy tomorrow and ask anybody there who's the kindest, most gentle, tender soul who works there, they won't say me. They'll say Mario. He now works behind the counter selling baked goods. Kind, gentle. He is proof that only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness has any shot at changing the world. So we get to Gonzaga, and I know this kind of thing never happens here, but they have the main talk at night, but then they tell you then that you have 95 other talks that they hadn't told you about. And so it's this class, this lunch, this class, this meeting, all damn day. And I tell these 2 guys, look, I'm not going to speak at all. I'll sit in the back of the classroom. I want to go ahead, get up and tell your stories. And so they do, and they're stories of torture and terror and violence abuse of every imaginable kind. And honest to God, if their stories were flames, you'd have to keep your distance. Otherwise, you'd get scorched. So they get up, and just like these two gentlemen, they tell their stories in front of this crowd of 1,000. And then I do my thing. And I invited them back up here for Q&A. And a woman stands. She goes, "Yeah, I got a question. It's for Mario." Very first question out the gates for Mario. And he's this tall, skinny drink of water, and he clutches the microphone. He's trembling. "Yes?" And she says, "Well, you say you're a father, and you have a son and a daughter, and they're about to enter their teenage years. What wisdom do you impart to them? You know, what advice do you give them?" Mario closes his eyes and he clutches the microphone more tightly, and I can feel him trembling, and he's getting a damn hernia trying to come up with whatever the hell the answer should be. And when suddenly he blurts out, "I just..." And as soon as he says those two words, he retreats back to his microphone clutching, trembling retreat. And he closes his eyes, and now I know he's losing his battle with his tears, but he wants to get this sentence out. "I just don't want my kids to turn out to be like me." And there's silence until the woman who asked the question stands. And now it's her turn to cry. "Why wouldn't you want your kids to turn out to be like you? You are loving, you are kind, you are gentle, you are wise. I hope your kids turn out to be like you." And 1,000 total perfect strangers stand, and they will not stop clapping. And all Mario can do is hold his face in his hands, so overwhelmed that this room full of strangers had returned him to himself. And they, in turn, likewise returned to themselves, which shouldn't surprise us, because it's mutual. And I think that's the only praise our exhausted God has any interest in. LMU has never been the place that you came to. It's always been the place you go from. And you go from to imagine with God a circle of compassion, and then you imagine nobody standing outside that circle. You go from here to dismantle the barriers that exclude. You create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. And my sense of you already is that you have ceased to care whether anyone accuses you of wasting your time. For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. You go to those margins and you look at each other and you say, "You're here." And you notice the notice of God, and it doesn't get better than that. Thank you all very much.
Thank you all. A few notes as we wrap up, and we've given a hearty applause to Father Greg but can we one more time do it for Michael and Edwin for sharing their stories as well? Thank you. So as we conclude, we just want to share a few notes with you. First, in the corner over there, the LMU bookstore is selling the copies of Barking to the Choir. And so we would highly encourage you, if you've enjoyed this afternoon, if you value the work that Homeboy Industries is doing, drop by, grab a book. Nothing says Happy Valentine's Day to our friends and loved ones like Radical Kinship there. The other thing, too, is you can always learn more about Homeboy Industries and tune in to their inspiring thought for the day if you need a little 5-minute pick-me-up each day. So I will not be offended if you take out your phones while I'm talking and find them on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter and follow them. And finally, we'd just be remiss if we didn't share a little bit of gratitude with a few folks here in this room. So I first want to thank Doug Christie, the professor in theological studies who convinced Greg to spend the day with us. And I want to thank a very small but mighty committee of people who, along with Doug and I, worked so hard to make this day possible, and to name them. So Rich Rochlow, Pam Rector, Steve Nygaard, Allison Mullen, Kiana Paklaban, and Rayanna Bonnell. Thank you all so much for your hard work. And of course, thank you to Dr. Lainey Beauvais, the Senior Vice President for Student Affairs, and also to Dean Robin Crabtree, the Dean of the Bellarmine College of Liberal Arts. And finally, just a huge thank you to all of you for spending this part of your day with us. We're thankful for it, and we're really excited to imagine how you are going to take this message and really kind of go from this place, as Greg has challenged us to do, and bring this idea of kinship into the so many communities that all of us are a part of. So thank you once again, and have a wonderful evening.